Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining,
Hey,
everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're back again with another LinkedIn audio event. Really excited to have this conversation with two industry experts, one of them being Sean Barrett and the other being Dr. Chow. But as always, I am joined by my very good friend and everyone's favorite developer evangelist, Mr. Micah Smith. Micah, what's going on?
hey, Gabe, so great to be here. I know that this isn't video, but I want you to know I am wearing a tweed sport coat because I take this very seriously.
Yes, I have a tweed hunting vest on with and I have a pipe as well
Yeah,
in a
this
in a
is
big
the
leather
audio only
chair.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
this
I
is
think I
fun. I'm
feel like
super
we
happy
could
to be
use
here.
AI to sorry, I was just gonna say I feel like we can use AI to like generate images of the scene of what we're describing, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here. Super excited to talk to both Sean and Dr. Chow about AI in healthcare. I think this is going to be a really exciting episode.
Yeah, this is gonna be great. So without further ado, let me first introduce our first guest, Mr. Sean Barrett, the SVP of Product at R1. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Gabe. Excited for the conversation today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being
Absolutely.
here.
Sean, can you
And
tell us a little bit
also,
about your? Oh, sorry. Are we going straight
oh, sorry,
into
I was just
everyone?
gonna, yeah, I was just gonna introduce our other very special guest, one of my favorite people at the company, Dr. Yan Chow. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks, Gabe. Happy to be here. hmm
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And Sean, I want to hear a little bit about yourself and what R1 does specifically in the healthcare industry for some background for myself and our listeners.
Sounds great. So, R1 is a leading provider of technology enabled revenue cycle management services. And really, we focus on improving both the patient experience and ultimately our clients' overall financial performance. We serve large health systems, physician groups, post acute providers, basically spanning all care settings and all different specialties within the healthcare system. And if you just to give you a sense of scale, more than 90 of the top 100 health systems we call clients, and we really use technology and data and other things to really optimize the revenue cycle processes and ultimately make sure our clients can capture a greater share of the revenue for the clinical services they provide to patients. My role at R1 is a senior vice president of product, as Gabriel said. Basically, I lead our data platform, analytics, data science, and intelligent automation verticals. So everything having to do with data and how to use that data to improve outcomes for our clients is under my purview.
It's awesome. There's so many conversations, and the reason we're here today specifically around AI and data, but just fundamentally, I think that no matter who I talk to, this concept of unstructured data, being able to access that, leverage it, sort of classify it, put it into some sort of format that then works, right? I mean, right now it's a manual process, takes a lot of work, specifically in healthcare with um, all of the myriad of regulations and the amount of data. I was at the doctor yesterday, actually. I had to get my annual physical and I took a spill on my mountain bike. And so I had to get a referral for a shoulder. But it's funny because I was at the desk as I was leaving, getting the referral, and so succinctly remember hearing like the sound of the stapler and looking at the paperwork and all the various copies that the admin was creating so that I could get this simple referral over to the MRI or what have you. And I'm just sitting there reflecting, knowing that we're having this conversation today. I'm thinking, man, I could like save you guys so much time and effort. And I also wouldn't get this packet that for sure I'm going to lose this referral thing.
It's amazing that healthcare is still very much a paper bound process in a lot of ways, right? I mean, probably the desk that you were standing at had a Fujitsu scanner sitting at it because they're having to fax or scan some documents in to send to someone else as well. So lots of opportunities for automation there because a lot of that data has to be then re-entered manually once it's been scanned and shared.
hmm
But Dr. Chow, you've been I mean, you really truly are an industry expert. You've been in the field for the entire career, right? And
Hmm.
now you get to work with, the biggest healthcare providers
Hmm.
um, on behalf of or with automation and automation anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, Talk to me about the evolution because, I mean, to both of you guys, obviously generative AI, specifically ChatGPT is Kleenex for generative AI, right? Like
Hmm.
everyone just calls it ChatGPT, but it's obviously much bigger than that. When you think about AI, generative AI. But Dr. Chow, talk to me a little bit about how much of the hype machine is actionable over the course of what you've seen even in the last 6 months, but also prior to that when AI is being leveraged maybe for IDP, intelligent document processing or otherwise. Like what's
Yeah,
happening now? What's real and
yeah.
what's possible?
I'd say that we are definitely on the up slope for the Gartner hype cycle. I would say we're probably 95% or more on the hype, but it's mostly because for healthcare, it's mostly because healthcare is highly regulated. But, I've been in innovation my entire career. And by the way, thanks for the designation as an expert. I think as you get older, you become more expert. That's what's happened. That's just what's happening with me. But I have never seen a technology, and I've seen hundreds of technologies. I've never seen a technology take off so fast. Every company that we talk to is actually fundamentally re-evaluating its business model in light of generative AI. And I think, and I know that since I would say 2018, there have been at least 23 major models that have been developed for generative AI. And the output is incredible, whether it's text, images, audio, or the other day I saw a video created by generative AI. It seems like it could have been created by a human writer or composer or artist. And OpenAI released ChatGPT in November of last year, just 6 months ago. I think what really created the buzz is that millions of people were able to use it, and the buzz became super viral because it really does something different than what AI used to do. I think over 1 million people downloaded ChatGPT within a week, or 100 million within 2 months, or something like that. And so, healthcare very regulated, but it's not to say there aren't numerous physicians, and there are numerous physicians, including myself, trying it out. Hmm.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's incredible the uptake. But also as you mentioned, in speaking with the customers and prospects out there and them integrating or planning to integrate the technology. Sean, from your perspective as the head of product, what kind of conversations are you having with customers?
Yeah, no, I echo everything Dr. Chow said. So, I mean, I think the potential for the technology is tremendous. I think we are in this super early innings of it, and I think the world's evolving very, very quickly. Um, I was listening to Greg Brockman, who's one of OpenAI's co-founders at South by Southwest, and he was asked, what industry does he hope his technology is applied to first? And his answer was healthcare. He didn't miss a beat. So, I mean, while healthcare is a very regulated industry, I think the impact that this technology and AI in general can have on just everyone's lives is tremendous. I think one of the key things as we look about kind of in the near term of kind of trying to get over the hype a bit is really to make sure we're using this technology to enhance or augment a professional and not replace the professional. And what I mean by that
Mm.
is, if we can save a physician spending an hour and a half or 2 hours going through a chart, and we can summarize that with this language models, right, up into a distinct set of things that he or she really needs to know, we're still putting the clinician in charge of the care plan, in charge of using their professional judgment and expertise, right, to really treat and diagnose illness. But we're making them a lot more effective and efficient, and taking out a lot of the candidly the pain points and administrative burden that is causing burnout in the healthcare industry. So I think if you can apply them in kind of with that human in the loop type of uh, type of processes, I think there's tremendous potential even in the short term for this technology.
And I agree. I think that Sean has a really good point. If you think about AI in general and how it's pre-trained on data, it's really good for things that have a lot of data. But where the physician shines and where highly trained personnel shine is where there's not a lot of data, i.e., the rare cases, the exceptions, the complications. Those are the things that we don't have a lot of data. And so what John is saying is that the physicians will be freed up to really focus on what we call practicing at the top of your license. And I think that's going to be very exciting.
I think that's always an interesting conversation, whether it's in healthcare or across any industry, and that is the idea of sort of the employee experience or the experience of the person um, being empowered by the automation to do the thing that they sort of either trained or certified or what they fundamentally want to be doing to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not stapling 17 pages together and faxing and do all these things over and over and over again, right? But I wanted to go back. Last week we had Ted Shelton from Bain on, and we had an amazing conversation about generative AI trends, et cetera. And one of the things he had mentioned was the sort of the half-life or the life cycle of innovation with AI and how it keeps getting shorter. I think everyone's probably seen the news where prominent names have asked for a moratorium on development and releasing the next gen so that we can make sure that we're doing this in a ethical and safe manner. Beyond that, though, specifically in healthcare, with the speed of innovation as it's happening with Gen AI and other AI models, is it possible that healthcare can leverage these technologies as they come, or how like what's the lag, if you will, or is there one?
Well, I think there are actually some structural barriers in healthcare, as well as regulatory. Healthcare tends to move really slow. If you look at what changes things in healthcare faster, COVID, to be honest, challenges that are urgent and there's no option. But otherwise, healthcare, is famous for being very, very slow to change for a good reason. And part of it is because of the traditional need for things like randomized controlled trials, which are actually have been very good for many years, but it's slowing down the pace of innovation. So now, especially with the government pushing for including non-medical data in our judgment decision, things like income, educational level, neighborhood we live in, and access to healthcare, and all those structural determinants of healthcare, that is causing us to really reach out beyond the medical realm to bring in other data, and that's where we get to the point where physicians and nurses really cannot handle that much data, and so they need help. And so I think healthcare is moving towards an area where you will need some kind of help to deal with increasing data, the data that we need to consider. The challenge with healthcare is that it needs validation and proof. And for data outside healthcare, it's often not possible to do RCTs or randomized control trials. You need to actually do a different kind of proof, using observational statistics. So that's a paradigm shift, that old term paradigm shift for healthcare. But it's I think where we're headed. The other challenge for healthcare is that if you look at a broad Gen AI like ChatGPT, it's known that it doesn't have much data beyond September 2021. And so for healthcare, of course, that's a showstopper because we need the latest information, the latest research, the latest global events, pandemics, things like that. So then, you bring up the idea of what if we do like a private Gen AI, something where we develop a proprietary or closed one where we focus just on data that's current and where it's possible, even feasible or cost effective to do that. And that's another challenge. But yeah, those are some of the issues.
Yeah, Dr. Chow, that's really interesting you bring that up because I think that's probably the next wave of this is like, I don't want to always use a model that's been trained on the entirety of the internet and only up to, some point in 2021 or something like that, or lagging behind. Google last week announced the generative AI app builder that they're introducing for Gen apps, as well as an enhancement for their Vertex to be able to train generative models in that way.
Hmm.
How would you see healthcare organizations being able to take advantage of models that they would train themselves and run privately?
I think even if you limit it to healthcare information, it's still, the amount of research literature, the amount of data that impacts and influences healthcare decisions is just growing beyond exponentially. And so my concern is, and this may be not a concern in the future, but my concern is it's actually computationally really, really expensive to do any kind of a generative AI. And so the question is, who's going to foot the bill, in terms of computational costs, in terms of resources, in terms of all the stuff that needs to get into a sort of the mainstream, including regulatory work and consensus and that kind of stuff. So I guess that's the main question. Now, maybe computation will be cheaper in the future. So that's always a possibility, but um, there are some, barriers on the way. The other issues that I hear a lot is the issue of privacy and security. And so a private generative AI would probably address that as well, although we could add in other mechanisms to address that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. I would echo that last point on privacy and security. I know that we're obviously in a regulated industry. HIPAA and many other regulations govern what we can do with data and how data can be used. I think, I know all the cloud providers are marching towards Azure being kind of our preferred cloud, marching towards private models that can have all the right regulations and kind of protect, for lack of a better term, the data from the rest of the ecosystem. So that's going to be critical in healthcare to have those models deployed. I think the other thing I would just say is, given the road of innovation in healthcare is like paved with, or by the side of the road are a lot of tech companies that came into healthcare and said, we can just apply technology that's really magical and transform the entire ecosystem. But Gabe, you mentioned the fax machine in your opening comments. That fax machine is integrated with 7 different processes and 6 different ecosystem players. Right. And so it's a lot. It's a very complex ecosystem within healthcare.
Right.
And so I think we see, typically more of a incremental process versus step change process in healthcare. And I think for the kind of innovators on the phone, I think it's really important, at least in the short term, to meet the ecosystem where it is and understand how to work within the constraints there, because it's really hard to change an industry that is a sixth of the U.S. economy overnight.
It's I think that's interesting, Sean, because I think oftentimes with these new technologies, like we're like, oh yeah, we'll just come in. You're like, let's clear space with a backhoe, with a bulldozer, but it's probably more accurately, you need to sort of use a scalpel to make some changes, right? No pun intended, but you need to be a little more precise, a little more thoughtful. You can't just sort of, to your point, step change necessarily, especially in such a highly regulated environment. And I know we got a question in the comments from Aviel about the HIPAA GDPR situation. So hopefully that addressed some of that for you, Aviel, but we encourage you to clarify if you want some more clarity on that. Let's, guys, real quick, I want to get into use cases. We've talked about, I want to get into, what do you think is practical now? Sean, what are you guys doing now? Leveraging AI, Dr. Chow, what are our customers doing right now? I know we've had some interesting conversations for you, but before we get there and get into the use cases, let's bring in one of our guests, or one of our, what will we call our folks that are listening to the show?
Listeners.
Just a listener. I feel like they need to be elevated though, because they're part of the fam, So anyway, let's see what Harvey has to say. Simon, can you bring Harvey in the conversation? See what's on his mind.
Hey, Harvey.
Harvey, can you hear us?
There, can you hear
I
me?
see Harvey's got a ChatGPT logo in the profile pic. So looks like you're on brand here, Harvey.
I am. Hey, thanks for having me. Honor to be on here with everybody. Big picture, obviously I'm a big advocate for this technology in healthcare, and I totally agree with Dr. Chow's points as far as, this is different from any other industry. We just can't jump in and create X, Y, Z because this is healthcare, and healthcare, you pay for your mistakes. You're not going to do something, and it's not like real estate where it makes a mistake and it's going to, yes, it may financially hurt you, but here we're talking about people's lives. So totally get that point. My counterpoint to just mention to Dr. Chow, as I know, and I kind of just put it on the comments, is that I do see a lot of companies working hard towards this healthcare GPT, and I totally agree with that comment. I think in the future people will call it ChatGPT, but in reality it may be Bard or maybe some other GPT equivalent. But my point is as follows. I see Microsoft working hard towards healthcare, and I don't know if this is intentional or it is intentional, but I think it is intentional, where they're creating BioGPT, they have ChatGPT, they're creating all the different parts of a bigger machine to, in my opinion, dominate healthcare. And I see other companies jumping in this GPT equivalent.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there are industry specific solutions that all of the big boys are coming up with, right, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree, right? I mean, it is kind of an arms race with the big cloud vendors here. I mean, it would be probably business malpractice, to coin a term, to not address aspects of the U.S. economy, right? So of course, all the major players can get in here, right? You mentioned BioGPT. I mean, Google released MedPalm 2, which is kind of, again, a medical train model. So they're all investing heavily here, and probably rightfully so, just given the market share or the percentage of the overall GDP this makes up. I do think, though, that as we continue to evolve use cases of this, like for example, you mentioned Microsoft, they purchased Nuance for an ungodly sum of money a little while back, and they've now essentially they're in their kind of in Nuance's product, which listens and transcribes a visit, et cetera, and does transcription on behalf of providers. They're now going to leverage GPT-4 behind the scenes there to do that a little better. So it's a case where it's an existing technology. They were using prior generations of AI to power that, and now it's an incremental improvement in terms of accuracy, capability, et cetera, into that solution. So I think that's kind of what we're going to see.
I think also what we're seeing in healthcare is a lot of very unusual vertical integrations, like with Walmart and CVS and Amazon and so on. So all those folks, they're all looking into this technology. I know that Amazon, Apple, and other folks, Baidu, for instance, they're all developing Gen AI types of functions. And the interesting thing is that when that becomes common in retail, where you're as a consumer very used to a very intelligent chatbot that you deal with to help you shop, to help you make decisions, if that will translate or drive anything into the consumer aspect of healthcare. And I think that's a really interesting question. The other question that Harvey brought up, which is a good point, is that with all the regulation in healthcare, I think we found that folks in healthcare are becoming more sophisticated because really every technology introduced in healthcare has a certain level of risk. And that's a much more nuanced evaluation than just saying everything needs to meet the life and death safety criteria of healthcare. There are things we can do, many things. And we found, for instance, in revenue cycle, a lot of the stuff doesn't impinge on patient safety, but it can be very important for a healthcare organization, nonetheless, from a business point of view. So are there beginner steps that we can take that are low risk? And if you look at what physicians are doing or what they're posting today about how they're playing with ChatGPT, we're looking at, claims rebuttals, things like that, where some physician posted that he actually generated a claims rebuttal, very, authoritative, very credible. It's just that when you look at the references that it uses, they're all fictional. So things like that are a lot of fun, but they are maybe lower risk in kinds of endeavors. So that's
just gotta hope
interesting.
they don't check.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Actually, I mean, we're actually experimenting with that same stuff in our business today, and I think what we have kind of pitched it to our executive team is, use these technologies to build the rough draft of what you're going to use, and then you put it in the hands of an expert that can, probably take the 10 or 15 or 20% that might not be perfectly accurate within that document, but it saves them the 80% of the time, right? So I'm taking a task that might take 10 minutes, and now it takes 2 or 3, and you multiply that across, the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of appeals our company sends on a yearly basis, and that time really adds up.
Yeah, that's huge.
Hey, Sean, just for my own edification, because I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but potentially for our audience as well, talk to us a little bit about RCM in particular. I'm struck by some data I've seen recently in articles, et cetera, wherein, if you believe the headlines, healthcare is in a state of emergency. Institutions are struggling to generate or to meet the costs even, let alone thrive and provide what they need to do. There's a productivity gap. We know about the impacts of COVID, the burnout. We know about all those things, but how fundamental? Or I guess there's two questions. One, talk to me a little about RCM in particular, and then how R1 is helping these customers, helping your customers leverage automation, intelligent automation, to be able to be the best and provide the best care that they can.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's kind of a perfect storm for providers right now, right? We have, record low unemployment rates, which means even if you wanted to pay for the staff and hire, you might not be able to find them. And we also have kind of constant margin pressures with everything from contract labor to just supplies and all the other things that need to that are needed to run the core of a hospital or health system. And you layer on top of that generally any spare dollar doesn't go to an administrative function like revenue cycle, right? Every spare dollar at a hospital goes to improving clinical care and goes to clinical specialties. And so you kind of have this perfect storm for rev cycle in particular, where costs are going up, funding's going down, and candidly, the ecosystem becoming much more and more complex. And so one of the real advantages I think a firm like R1 has is we're able to make the investments at scale once for all of our clients that they would have to make individually. So for example, I'll give a really simple example. We have a lot of intelligent automation that will ingest documents, unstructured documents from a payer or from an insurance company, structure those in a way, understand, interpret the codes on those documents, actually go fetch whatever documentation we need to appeal or to satisfy that demand from a payer, and then upload that automatically onto a payer portal that a human is completely not in the loop on. Now, that took a lot of development effort and a lot of candidly resources and time and money to build that out and scaled across the ecosystem. But we can make that investment because we manage north of $55 billion in NPR on behalf of our customers on an end-to-end basis. Whereas if I'm a $2, $3, $4, $5 billion health system, which are large local players, right, in their markets, they really can't make that investment because they won't get an ROI on it. And so I feel like we're in a great position to make those investments on behalf of our customers and our clients that result in lower cycle time for claims, more cash flow to them, and also just generally a higher quality experience that results in more revenue.
Awesome.
That's really interesting. On the case of talking about use cases, Dr. Chow has kind of talked about the fact that as a physician, you're making a determination on diagnosing someone's illness, right? And I'm not a doctor, so bear with me here, but I'm thinking about
just play one on LinkedIn audio.
Yeah. I just put it on my title. So I think about the process when I go to see my own doctor and I'm sick, right? I try to describe what I'm feeling in the best way that I can put language to it, right? And then that individual is trying to interpret what I'm saying, and based on their own training and experience, trying to diagnose what may be going on with me, right? And if you think about how generative AI could fit into that to complement that person's decision making, how would you see medical care of the future, right? I mean, would you be benefited as a physician by having this, model that's able to maybe look at something from a different angle or look at some different research than maybe you were trained on, or vice versa? Like, does that second opinion for a doctor become something that's like a really interesting perspective for a generative AI model?
Yeah, I think it really can. I mean, as I was mentioning, in the future, future doctors who I talk with sometimes are going to have to deal with more information than they can assimilate all at once. In fact, there's been studies showing that you cannot keep up with your specialty, even if you spend more than 24 hours a day, if you could, to keep up with the latest knowledge. On top of that, you have to know stuff about your patient, like their medical history, their compliance history, where they live, as I mentioned, their income, their education, their culture. And so can really become a really useful assistant. And I'll tell you a story that actually from my days at Kaiser. I have a friend who's a diabetologist, takes care of diabetes patients. She's Filipino. She practices in the Bay Area, and she has a large Filipino patient population. And for the life of her, she could not get them to follow, the diet, the exercise, the medications. They just didn't see it as important until she hit upon the idea that the Filipino culture is very family oriented. So she would use a different incentive and say, "Don't you want to see your granddaughter's wedding?" And
Hmm.
that turned the tide. It's all of a sudden people started to to comply and to do exercise and things like that. And so she told me that. I was thinking, what if you're let's say a white physician or black physician, Chinese physician, you're dealing with a Filipino patient. How would you ever know that? Right? Well, ChatGPT can actually give you that advantage. In fact, I've tried this. I would say, simulate this for me, ChatGPT. Tell me what I should say to get better compliance from a patient who's 54 years old, Chinese, came from mainland China, doesn't speak English well, and it'll just pop it out within 2 seconds. It's amazing, right? So I think that kind of thing points to something that could be very useful today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually have a diabetic father-in-law who's Filipino, so I'm going to try that exact
okay.
technique.
I think that's fascinating. It's crazy because I literally was just reading an article yesterday. Obviously, there's no shortage of articles on the subject for around generative AI, but they were talking about practicing sales pitches and practicing this pitch and different debating. Just using ChatGPT as your counterpart to run stuff by. And I haven't personally done that yet. I've sort of gone input, give me this, and give it back to me. But I think that's fascinating. But let's go further on the. Sorry, we're going to speak to that a little more because I was going to say, I think it's also interesting when you brought up this idea of the sort of the consumer side. So I think there's two, and I'd be interested to know from the two of you. I feel like there's the consumer experience side, and then there's the physician and skilled medical professional side in terms of application.
Yeah, I think for the consumer side, I think there's some obvious benefits, such as you get a much better personalized experience. And if you have AI explaining to you in your language, in your culture, et cetera, that AI is totally got unlimited patience with you, right? So you can spend all day trying to understand what your doctor said, which is very often a problem for a lot of people. It's a problem for me when I go see my doctor. What did he really say? So you can spend all day with the AI until they explain to you, basically in different ways, what you have to do, why you have to do it, why your coverage in these areas, that area, and so on and so forth. And for the physician, besides the issue of understanding your patients better, I think one of the key advantages of generative AI is it's super good at summarizing complex scenarios, and I think that's going to save a lot of time. If you're seeing a patient for the first time who has a complex medical history, several conditions, and you don't know them, they don't know you, and you're seeing them, it will take you at least 15 minutes, 30 minutes to try to figure out what's going on. You look through the medical record, you try to figure out what's important, what's not. At least generative AI gives you a first draft. It can summarize the record for you, and it saves a ton of time so that you can walk into the visit with some idea of what you need to do. Yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting, and ultimately, right, myself, Gabe, Dr. Chow, and Sean, we're all working with automation capabilities on a daily basis, and I want to hear some more about the cross section of intelligent automation and generative AI, because when I think about it as a technologist, I think about that there's really two main ways that we can integrate automation with generative AI capabilities today, right? There's one where an unattended automation is consuming generative AI to make better decisions about what it's doing or fill data or extract pertinent data in a different way. And I think there's the other side where we have someone who is using something like Ari or Copilot or an attended automation use case where we're enabling a user to maybe invoke an automation that would call a generative AI model, or allowing a user to call a generative AI model directly. So I'm curious about some of those use cases where we say the generative AI is a great complement to automation in a healthcare space.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Dr. Chow.
No, I was just saying. I did write a blog about that recently. I was trying to figure that out as well. How they relate, and there's many different kinds of AI, many different kinds of automation. And I can see generative AI as sort of the cognitive. Is the thinking piece, the brain, and intelligent automation, or automation as we have it, is actually the brawn. So it's the brain and the brawn. So you have the thinking, and then you need to carry out those things that you've thought about and you want to do, and those and the actions that you do have to be done, physically, actually, by automation. So I think that's one way they can fit together. Sean, to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's funny. When I was first pitching, I'm thinking a few years back, the intelligent automation ecosystem to our board and some of our senior executives, I actually had a picture of AI. This was a few generations ago, but AI sitting in the brain, and then task bots being arms and legs of that body, right?
Right.
And so I think we think about it the same way. Really, what is the barrier to automating more and more and more processes, right? If you think about like the water line below an iceberg, where the most of the work actually lies below that watermark of things that are actually automatable. What allows us to lower that water line really is decision making, right? The ability to understand what the next step is in a process with some level of virtual certainty, and go ahead and take that. I do think that that plays. I'll use the term broad umbrella of AI, because I do think that, given some of the hype, we are kind of saying generative AI or the GPTs of the world is kind of everything looks like a nail because it's a hammer. I do think there are other disciplines within the AI kind of umbrella that are more appropriate for certain kind of forecasting or decision making, or other types of things like that. But I will say the broad umbrella of AI, though, I do think serves that brain function.
Yeah, that opens up a ton of possibilities. I think there's just so many lenses, and sort of I'm struck by you're talking about sort of that step change versus sort of the incremental change at the top when we were speaking earlier, and to your point, the hammer and the nail idea. I wanted to, I know in working with Dr. Chow and our healthcare team here, we've been looking at different use cases. So, by the way, to our audience, thank you to those of you that are sharing your solutions in your builds. I know many of you tag Micah and myself in the team or Automation Anywhere as you share these demos, and they're extraordinary. So keep it up. Cheers to you guys, and thank you for doing that. We have some really great community events coming up. I'll tease that a little bit here. And Micah, I think, has some big announcements coming up as well, but that's just a little tease for you. Getting back to the topic at hand, so we talked about sort of the practicality, this idea of incremental change and finding those situations, and I think we've talked a little bit about that, and we can go through a list, and we're going to be having more use cases. But also, what are some of Sean, from your perspective, you talking about how you had to pitch the board back years ago on Intelligent Automation. What are some of the moonshot ideas that you have, that the team has, that your customers have? What are you guys thinking about?
Yeah, I think the moonshot idea, at least in healthcare revenue cycle, is autonomous coding, right? That is kind of one of the people on my team uses the analogy of it's the self-driving car of revenue cycle. And so I think that is in terms of like generally across all specialties and all patient types, be able to autonomously code and basically take the human out of that administrative process, which is very labor intensive today, even with all the technology that has been thrown at that problem throughout the history. I think that is the moonshot idea. I think although there are firms out there that are investing very heavily in the space, they're still very specialized to certain subspecialties and things that are a little more, that are easier to do. I think truly a general solution in that space is the moonshot, and we are pretty far away.
Awesome. Dr. Chow, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Sean. I mean, something like that would just totally change healthcare. I think a general ability to build and code and understand healthcare. I always think about the other thing I think about is how do you scale healthcare? I mean, we have, as Sean mentioned, we have a huge problem with skilled labor shortage. We have increasing demand. We have unpredictable demand. So the question is, how do you scale healthcare? One way is through automation. Of course, you want to automate everything you can automate so you can scale, up and down. But the other thing I think about sometimes is besides the moonshot, there are a couple of moonshots. One is, for instance, online virtual care. Can we actually do medical care totally virtual and totally AI? And maybe for certain cases, let's say you have a simple medical condition, and if the system knows who you are and knows your medical history, you could do some of that. That would help to scale healthcare. The second thing is, can you really do clinical decision support? And by that I mean, can you actually make medical decisions that are reliable and trustworthy and legally defensible? And I think that's way in the future, but that's sort of where everybody's trying to go. I think we'll need in the future a new skill set, a new job description called prompt writer. It turns out that
Yeah,
the
the
ability,
prompt engineering,
yeah,
right?
prompt engineering, it pays well. There are some jobs already, but the ability to get the most out of the AI again requires some training of humans. And in fact,
Hmm.
there are some reports where humans are saying, "Yeah, this doesn't work," and then they find out how to do the prompt, and then they go, "This works great." So I think there's some training on our part. And again, it's this sort of, synergy between human and machine that sort of keeps going back and forth between user friendliness and totally opaqueness, machine opaqueness, opacity.
Yeah, agreed. But yeah, the prompt I mentioned this on previous events. This idea of prompt engineering is I first sort of really became aware of it when here was in Davos and on a panel at Davos.
Mm,
And there was a gentleman from Stanford, and he sort of brought that up. They sort of study the future of work and the workforce. Anyway, I'm fascinated by that. And to your point, I think there was I saw a post recently that prompt engineers are now like the most in demand role, and they're paying like $300,000 a year for these folks. So I think
yeah.
that's fascinating.
And I
But
think the other thing that's really interesting is that that's fascinating is that could there be moonshots we know nothing about? And so I
mhm,
was doing some reading, and actually, one of the most intriguing things about generative AI is that we're finding these emergent abilities, what they call emergent abilities, or unpredictable abilities that were not present in prior models, and that were not explicitly programmed into the current models. And some of these things are like people mention multi-step arithmetic or passing US medical licensing exams, bar exams, SAT, things like that. Identifying the meaning of a word within the context or chain of thought prompting, like a conversation, things like that. So I think those kind of things are really interesting because we may find out within a couple of years that this kind of AI can be useful in many other areas that we had not suspected. So,
I expect that'll be the case, especially to Micah's point about the cross section of not just the AI, but with the automation, with intelligent automation.
yeah. Yeah.
I think Sean, you put it perfectly with the arms and the legs metaphor.
Mhm.
Um, so, guys, and to our audience, for those of you that may be at HIMSS in Chicago, good news. Sean and Dr. Chow will also be there. So if you're in Chicago at HIMSS the week of April 17th, I believe, Automation Anywhere will be there in full force. And not only will is Dr. Chow and Sean, you guys are doing a panel discussion, right?
Yes, we are on Tuesday, and I'd be happy to meet with folks if they're going to be there. The schedule's really filling up, though, so let me know.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have to hear that conversation as well, and we'll be doing a
Mhm.
lot of stuff at the booth. So if you are there, please stop by. We've got more demos. We talked about some of the use cases, some of the moonshots and all that. I know, Dr. Chow, we've been working on a demo about provider abstraction, but give me just quickly, some other sort of practical applications that we're working on right now that you think are interesting.
Yeah, one example, for instance, is that with one organization, they're really interested in email triage. That's another killer app, So physicians, friends of mine, spend at least an hour or two per evening working on email from their patients. And so email triage means that you abstract the data, you run it through Gen AI, figure out what the context is, and then you can use automation to take care of the triage and do what needs to be done. So that's a really interesting use case. It gets a lot of attention and a lot of interest when I mention that. But there are many other things I've read recently about cybersecurity. Can we use generative AI to recognize cybersecurity threats? I think that's a really interesting area because that's something that humans just can't. We don't have the ability to do that, but AI could do that. Other things I mentioned: patient-physician experience, data synthesis, decision support. Simulation is another area. I mentioned about simulating a patient persona so that you can learn. Let's say you're a new physician, you can learn to deal with a frustrated patient or an angry patient if you can have the AI simulate that. And as you mentioned, Gabe, I think medical record abstraction is going to be a big application as well. But there's so many areas, and healthcare is really a target-rich, as you know, a target-rich environment. So.
Sean,
Yeah,
what are
well,
your
I'll
thoughts?
say a lot of the use cases, can kind of be boiled down to how do we take this ocean of data, how do we extract insights out of that, and how do we summarize it so it's digestible to whoever needs to do that. But I'm super. I mean, if you think about all of the healthcare data that's locked away in unstructured clinical notes, images, et cetera, in EHRs today, right? So I've read some sites upwards 80% of healthcare data is in that format. Imagine the improvement in administrative processes, rev cycle short, but even clinical processes, be able to distill that information down in a way, extract insights out of it, and present those insights at the right moment to anyone in the healthcare ecosystem. I think that interoperability and the ability to kind of extract value out of that data will be transformative.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Outside of healthcare, I always use this example with the customer service thing. I'm like, when I call AT&T or Verizon, whomever, and inevitably I have to enter my password or tell them my password and name 37 times before I can actually get to the decision. I'm like, does no one talk to each other here, or what's going on? And that's just in one company, let alone all the different referrals you have in the medical field, right? Dr. Chow, you were talking about the power of potentially a moonshot being, using AI to do sort of diagnosis and different things, and it just sort of made me chuckle. I've got a couple teens, and maybe you guys are familiar with this practice, but my daughter's convinced that she can go on the internet and figure out if this, that the mole that she's got is, something terrible. And typically, I think she decides that it is something terrible. But I know that's a common practice, and maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way we can help people.
I'm way too neurotic for that. Like every single time I have the worst thing. That's why I was like, this would be great technology, but I still need someone else to filter it for me so I don't freak out.
Yeah. I never Google health symptoms because I'm like, it's going to be terrible. Like, that's all there is to it.
Well, even in the old days, as medical students, that was a very common condition. That is, we would think that all of us would suddenly get the things that we're reading about. Yeah, I have this really rare disease. I think I have it, and it's a very neurotic kind of approach to learning. But yeah, I think, you don't, on one hand, you don't want generative AI to tell you, I don't think you have that, because it's always possible. But maybe they can tell you there's a 1% chance, so that's a little bit more applicable. But yeah, it's pretty much in the future right now.
That neuroses is how I live my entire life, Dr. Chow.
It's been a great session, you guys. Dr. Chow, Sean, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation in Chicago. I hope we get a chance to sit down and maybe expand on this a little bit and dive in a little deeper potentially. So thank you again for joining. As always, a tremendous conversation, very insightful and enlightening. I'm looking forward to the solution, Sean, that you and the team at R1 are introducing and using, and helping to make helping to make our healthcare system, not just productive but effective, and provide the support that my family and my friends and all of us need.
Yep. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.
All right, Gabe.
Last thing, Micah. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm putting Micah on the spot, so nobody knows this yet except for a select few. But
we gotta have a chance to plug this.
We got big news here. So Micah, take it away.
Yeah, we are going to be doing a new season of bot games starting May 1st. And this is the first time we've announced it. We'll have registration, I think, opening in the following days. But I do want to comment that one of the guests that we had already described one of our use cases that we're building out for a bot games challenge. So if you re-listen to all of this, you may be able to pick that up. But we will have a bot games challenge that is healthcare related. And I'm really looking forward to the experience. We've got some new, very fun, very challenging bot games challenges coming up.
So stoked for this. And this is encompassed around and surrounded by our new community environment and the launch of the new Pathfinder community. So tons of exciting stuff coming down the pike. And, at this point, everyone knows bot games. It's literally the industry's most fun, best event in terms of the bot building, the gamification, all these things. So I love the Easter egg that you dropped too, by the way, Micah. I'm gonna have to go back and listen and see if we can't tease that out, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a badge, maybe there's some swag we can give away to folks as they're sharing and tagging #botgame. So that said, look for more information on that coming very quickly, and we'll put some links in the comments here in the of the event. And again, thank you, Dr. Chow. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Micah. Great as always to catch up with you, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.